Good morning. I would like to call the meeting to order. My name is Dr. Young-Suk Bagley-Keene, and I'm honored to have been appointed as chair of the Reading Difficulties Risk Screener Selection Panel. I understand panel member Grasso is participating in this meeting from a remote location. Consistent with recent changes in the laws governing our meetings, I must ask, panel member Grasso, would you confirm that you are present?
Yes, hello. Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Panel member Grasso, would you confirm that there's nobody in the room you're participating from remotely?
Yes, confirmed.
Thank you. So as this is our first and inaugural meeting, State Board of Education President Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond is zooming in to offer some framing comments. Dr. Darling-Hammond.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can I be seen and heard?
Yes.
There we are. Terrific. It's great to be able to be with you here all today, ready to begin this really important work for California students. As we all know, for many students, success in reading is significantly enhanced by the identification of reading difficulties and the early provision of targeted instructional supports. By identifying potential issues when students are young, we can mitigate more substantial issues later. We can ensure better educational outcomes and support a love of learning for all students. So we're delighted to have state support for this initiative. This work that you are about to undertake is critically important, and it will be important to understand something about the context of our students, because the work that we do in identifying screeners will be in some ways unique to the context we're in, which is different than many states across the country. In addition to have the largest number of students in the country, California also has the most diverse student population. And I think there we go. More than 3/4 of our early elementary students are students of color. And there's significant heterogeneity in the cultural context and language backgrounds amongst the group of students. Most kindergartners enter from homes where English is not the initial language, and more than 1 in 4 kindergarten students are identified as English learners when they enter school. In addition, almost 2/3 of early elementary students in our state are socioeconomically disadvantaged and have often had less access to opportunities for pre-K learning than more affluent students prior to entering kindergarten. So if we have screening processes that are insensitive to these contexts, such factors can cause over-identification of children as at risk of reading difficulties when in fact they may simply be learning English or may not yet have had instruction. So we're going to need screening processes that can be sensitive to the students' situations and contexts. As we gain screeners that can function effectively and validly in more languages, more students will be able to be screened earlier, which will be an advantage to the process. So we're going to need to be leaning into that part of the screener, both development and incentives process. Of course, with the expansion of TK in California and the California preschool program, we are increasingly providing access to pre-K education to all students, regardless of background. But it is true that our students come to school with a wide range of educational exposures and backgrounds, and we'll want to be able to understand those and then consider them in the process. It's also important to remember that the screening instruments that you will be selecting are intended to be feedback mechanisms for educators and administrators that are part of a larger instructional program and a broader process of diagnosis. The instruments should be tools for teachers and families to help inform instructional strategies specific to each student's needs and learning strategies. The best tools will tell us not only if a child is at risk of reading difficulties, but also how. What are they struggling with? And point to what might be done next to support the child. These tools are not to be used to categorize or label a child or serve as a diagnosis of a disability. They should flag possible concerns to be understood in context and point to the next steps, both for instructional supports and further evaluation that may be needed. They should illuminate the unique profile of each student's literacy acquisition at a moment in time, providing information that helps schools mold instruction and support for their needs. Finally, the requirement to provide screening for risks of reading difficulty for all kindergarten through second grade students is not intended to be a silver bullet. The state has invested in many early literacy efforts, and the screening instruments that you choose should be able to be integrated with those other initiatives to ensure that local educational agencies have consistency in expectations and messaging from the state. These include the ELA-ELD framework, which is the state's foundational document to guide literacy instruction, the state's literacy roadmap, which is under construction now and will provide framework-aligned practical guidance for literacy instruction, the English Learner Roadmap, which provides guidance to local education agencies on implementation of the state standards and the framework for English language learners, the California Dyslexia Guidelines, which provide guidance in evidence-based reading and writing instruction and targeted interventions to students, and the multi-tiered system of support that the state has been supporting and encouraging. So these resources are in addition to other investments that the state has recently made in funding literacy coaches and reading specialists at high-need schools, professional development for teachers in the state, and new instructional resources to help accelerate learning. These are all tools in the toolbox for schools to use to support students identified as being at risk for a reading difficulty. And I think after we approve screeners, we'll want to communicate with districts about the ways in which they can fit into the system of literacy support that the districts are providing. So you have your work cut out for you. We have great faith in the expertise and experience represented by this panel. We know you will serve our students well. I'm very pleased that Dr. Young-Suk Kim has agreed to chair this group. She brings a wealth of knowledge, both from her classroom teaching experiences in San Francisco and her research on language and literacy development and effective instruction for racially, ethnically, economically, and linguistically diverse children from many language backgrounds, including Chinese, Korean, Spanish, and Kiswahili, and in areas ranging from dyslexia and reading fluency to reading comprehension, listening comprehension, oral language, and writing. I'm also very pleased that Yesenia Guerrero has agreed to serve as vice chair. Her extensive background in teaching both bilingual education and special education from pre-K through high school, and as a coach and a trainer, as well as a program specialist in special education, and working with a wide range of assessment instruments for students who are both English speakers and Spanish speakers, and intervention strategies will be invaluable in this work. She has a master's degree in reading and has received training through the California Dyslexia Initiative. And each of you brings an equally impressive background and knowledge base to this effort. I wish I could, for the knowledge of the public, go through all of your amazing accomplishments. We are very honored that you are willing to lend your time and expertise to this effort. It will be a great public service to our children, families, and educators in the state. And I look forward to hearing from Dr. Kim when she provides us with an update of your work at the March State Board of Education meeting. I really want to thank you for your service and wish you a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Darling-Hammond. Now, seeing that all panel members are present, I hereby call the February 16, 2024 meeting of the Reading Difficulties Risk Screener Selection Panel to order at 9:12 a.m. Vice Chair Guerrero, would you now lead us in the salute to the flag?
Sure. Please stand and turn to the flag.
Thank you. I would like to welcome panel members, staff, and members of the public who are attending this panel meeting in person, and those who are joining us virtually. Public comment on today's meeting agenda items may be provided during the meeting either in person by signing up on the sheet located in the back table or by calling 717-908-1926, then following a prompt to provide a participant access code. Callers will then be added to a queue. The operator will notify callers if it is their turn to provide public comment. Members of the public wishing to call in for public comment should view the live stream of the meeting to know at what time public comment will occur. When it's your turn, please mute the live cast audio. When giving public comment, please state the following: commenter's first and last name, organization affiliation, if any, and public comment. Again, the phone number is 717-908-1926. The access code is 1166083#. Again, 1166083#. The phone number and access code will also be announced at the start of public comment for each item. Public comment will be limited to 1 minute for each speaker. Item 4 is the general public comment item, during which members of the public may provide comment on matters that are not specifically listed on the panel's agenda. Now I'd like to take a few minutes to have each of the panelists introduce themselves. I would like to hold my introduction for when Vice Chair Guerrero and I give our opening remarks in item 1. So when I call your name, mute your microphone and please briefly introduce yourself. And we're gonna go by alphabetical order. So panel member Dominic Grasso.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Dominic Grasso. I'm an assistant professor at Cal State University Northridge. I mostly work in our advanced reading certification program, so our RLAA, RLSC. In my role at CSUN, I'm also the director of the LA Times Literacy Center, where our advanced credential candidates do their clinical in-service hours. I'm fairly new to California and LA in general. I just relocated here a year and a half ago. I came from Palm Beach County, Florida, where I worked in elementary school and also at the district level in the literacy department there. I am sorry I cannot be with you all in person today, but it's actually my my grandma's 90th birthday party tomorrow, so I'm actually in New York right now, and I will have to sign off a little early because I'm on East Coast time, but I'm excited to be on this panel in general, and I'll be at the next one in person.
Thank you. Just to make sure it's Dr. Grasso or not Grasso.
Oh, yeah, either pronunciation is totally fine.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, thank you. Now panel member Carleen Gravelin.
Hello, I'm Carlin Gravelin. I'm a speech-language pathologist specializing in dyslexia and language and literacy acquisition and disorders. I'm also a PhD candidate in literacy, focusing on reading comprehension and psychometric properties of diagnostic assessments. I do consulting and teacher training, as well as training for diagnosticians in reading comprehension, dyslexia, and diagnosing.
Right, thank you, welcome. Now panel member Gisela O'Brien.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. Glad to be here.
A microphone on, thank you.
There's always got to be the first one to forget, right? That's going to be me. I'm assistant director of bilingual and English Learners programs at the Center for Equity for English Learners at Loyola Marymount University, and I'm also an affiliate faculty there. And in that position, we work, we do research, and we also work in partnerships with schools to support their English learners and dual language programs, working with teachers, coaching, training, etc. Before that, I worked with the Los Angeles Unified School District as an advisor, English learner specialist, and as teacher. I coached, I mentored, I did all kinds of things while I was there for about 30 years. And then I also work for the County Office of Education in Los Angeles as an English learner specialist.
Fantastic. Thank you. Panel member Timothy Odegaard.
Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the lead, so I reminded myself to turn on the mic. I appreciate that. I'm Tim Odegaard. I am from Tennessee. So I am a professor of psychology, and I hold the Catherine Davis Murphy Chair of Excellence in Dyslexic Studies at Middle Tennessee State University. I lead the efforts of the Tennessee Center for the Study and Treatment of Dyslexia, and we do outreach efforts to try to raise awareness about dyslexia, do research to understand it, and look at implementation models. I also serve as the editor-in-chief of Annals of Dyslexia and a consulting editor for the Journal of Learning Disabilities. Before that, I put my way through college as a preschool teacher and a Montessori reading aide. And before that, I ran my county library's summer reading program for 2 summers as a volunteer when I started at 14 and wanted to help. And I didn't learn how to read and spell very well. And I never got intervention, and I never got identified. And as a parent, I watched as all my prevention work still came off the rails, and my son was struggling to read and spell words, which is how we define the literacy profile that we have called historically for about 130 years dyslexia. And that's a word that we use, and it has social context. But I came from a blue-collar background with parents who were doing good to graduate from high school. My son lives in a house with 2 college-educated parents. He's at genetic risk. So was my sister, and she has it as well. So thank you for allowing me to serve in the state of California, and I yield the mic.
Thank you. Panel member Jessica Neeson.
Good morning. I'm Jessica Neeson. My title is Read Coordinator in the Los Angeles Unified School District. That stands for Reading Education and Acceleration for Differentiation. So in my work, I support our early literacy programs in Los Angeles Unified district-wide as a central office administrator. And I'm also a former principal, a national board certified teacher. I taught kindergarten and first grade for a long time, so I taught a lot of students how to read. And this is a project that is very close to my heart because all children need to learn how to read, and they can. So we want to make sure that our efforts are put towards that goal. And additionally, I support early literacy efforts across the district, including launching letters as a district-wide learning initiative for our teachers. And also, I support the early literacy block grant for our schools in LA. So thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this panel.
Thank you. Panel member Martha Martinez.
Excuse me, I might have a frog in my throat. Excuse me for that. So I'm Martha Martinez, and I am the Senior Director of Research and Evaluation for SEAL, Sobrato Early Academic Language, an organization that provides professional development to PK through elementary school educators on how to best teach students who are learning English in schools. English as a new language or English as a second language, oftentimes referred to as dual language learners, English learners in the K-12 system, and multilingual learners as well. Lots of terminology. And I oversee research and evaluation efforts for SEAL and also have a background related to assessment when I worked at the Oregon Department of Education prior to coming to SEAL. Was part of the team that helped develop ELPA 21, which is a multi-state consortium for their English language screening assessment and annual assessment. In California, that's the LPAC. So I was part of the team that developed that, and as part of the team in the Oregon Department of Education overseeing services to English learners, much of that, or part of that work entailed trying to disentangle language difference from language disability, in the long-term English learner kind of conundrum that many states face, and so have done some work just on that, both mostly from a policy standpoint to try to provide guidance to states about how to appropriately interpret assessments for students to really disentangle those two confounds. So I'm also thrilled to be here. This is very important. I really appreciate Dr. Darling-Hammond's framing of California's population. So I think that's really important to keep in mind, and looking forward to our time together.
Fantastic. Thank you. Panel member Tamara Wilson.
Good morning. I am Tammy Wilson. Yes, Tamara, but I go by Tammy. And I am a director at the Sacramento County Office of Education. And I am the project lead on the California Dyslexia Initiative, for a statewide initiative aimed at providing professional learning resources and really building knowledge around dyslexia in our state. So that's been a really exciting project that I am engaged in. I hold a multiple subjects credential, a reading specialist credential, and an administrative credential, and have a master's in educational leadership. And I've been in this work for a lot of years, over 30 years. And I am really passionate about the importance of early support for our most at-risk learners, because I think reading is definitely something that all students deserve to have the capacity to engage in. Most recently, I was on the CTC Literacy Standards Work Group, so I'm really excited about that work. I was on the staff for the Common Core Standards Commission when the standards were adopted in our state, and I've done a lot of statewide work as a professional developer, designing and training on rollouts for statewide documents such as the ELA-ELD framework and the California Dyslexia Guidelines. I've also been the lead developer for several professional learning modules and series for teachers, coaches, and administrators, because I really think that we have a lot of resources available to educators in our state, but dissemination is something that we really need to focus on. So I'm really excited and actually very nervous to be on this really important panel, because I think this really has the capacity to make a huge difference for our most at-risk learners in, early, so that we can really change their trajectory and the outcomes that we see. So I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's truly exciting to work with this esteemed group of panel members. So item 1 is opening remarks from the chair and vice chair. So let me start with myself, and then we'll move to the vice chair. So my name is Young-Soo Grace Kim. I'm a professor and senior associate dean at the School of Education, University of California, Irvine. I came to the U.S. as an adult and went through the whole process of learning English, and I know how challenging and difficult that is. And I was a former classroom teacher in San Francisco in a bilingual classroom. As a researcher, I focus on looking at development of reading and writing and language and cognition for children who speak and learn to read and write in different language backgrounds, and that includes monolingual children as well as multilingual children, that different language pairs such as English, Spanish, Korean, English, etc. I also teach language and literacy and statistics courses in undergraduate program and PhD program, but also teacher education program. That's really close to my heart, because as a former classroom teacher, that's a really important part of my work. And I'm truly privileged to assume the role of the chair for this panel and for the well-being of children in California. Now I turn the microphone over to Vice Chair Guerrero for her opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Yesenia Guerrero. I am a special education teacher. I work in the Lenox School District, and I am also very involved with the California Teachers Association, where I am involved in some committees in the State Council, where we're actually talking a lot about the reading, language acquisition, which is one of the committees I belong to, and that comes up a lot. And so how they're interrelated. So I'm very happy to be able to be here and share my knowledge with you guys or learn from you as well. I'm also currently on the National Education Association. They have an IDA cadre, which I learned about 2 years ago when I applied. And I'm on that, and we also do a lot of creation of curriculum, but we really have our hand in all the different states, because the cadres members are from different parts of the state, of the country, which is very nice. And as a special education teachers, we basically take all these assessments and we implement them. We use them to figure out what we're going to help the students with. How are we going to design the programs? How are we going to design instructional strategies? So I'm really looking forward to creating something that can be normative, that can we use in everything. And then, because a lot of these students come to us in the special education world also to kind of help us also better understand what the deficits are, so we can support the gen ed teachers, because we do that as well, and also support the students when they come into the special education world. So I look forward to being ahead of this, and I appreciate just being here in general. So thank you. Oh, and I teach for Lenox. I don't know if I told you guys that. Lenox, I don't know if I said that, but I'm very proud of my district. So Lenox School District. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so let's move on to item 2, which is the Reading Difficulties Risk Screener Selection Panel Orientation. The agenda for this item is as follows: review of the charge of the panel and statutory requirements presented by Chief Deputy Executive Director of the State Board of Education, Jessica Holmes, and review of Bagley-Keene Opening Meeting Act requirements presented by the Chief Counsel of the State Board of Education, Kieran Gill. We'll begin with the review of the charge of the panel and statutory requirements. Now, Ms. Holmes, please begin your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Holmes. I'm the Chief Deputy Executive Director at the State Board of Education. It's a great pleasure to be in front of such an esteemed panel today. I am not an expert in literacy. However, I am an expert in the statutory requirements in charge of this panel, so I am well prepared to speak to you today on this topic. So I'm going to cover quite a few things today, and please feel free at any time if you have a question to just indicate that. I will try to get through as much of this as I can. There will be an opportunity to ask more questions afterwards, but if there's something you need clarified as I'm going along, please let me know. So today we're going to cover the statutory charge of the panel. We're also going to cover the work timeline that you can expect, as well as some conflict of interest requirements for serving on the panel. There we go. So the work that you are about to embark on is potentially could be very, very wide-ranging, and we have a very short timeline to complete it. And so it's really important that as we're beginning this work, we're grounding ourselves in the statutory charge of the panel. The authority that we all have to be here today comes to us from the legislature, as well as the administration. The governor did sign this bill. So it's important to understand what the parameters are that the legislature set up for us as we're beginning this work. This panel was established as part of the 2023 Budget Act that established the larger mandate to all local educational agencies to screen all kindergarten, first grade, and second grade students for risk of reading difficulty beginning in the 25-26 school year. So that's coming up pretty quickly here. I do want to note that the statutory language does clarify that for purposes of this requirement, kindergarten does not include transitional kindergarten. And that's a really important distinction because, as we all know, the developmental differences between a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old are pretty significant. As a mother of a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, I can tell you from personal experience, they're very different. This statute requires a panel of experts, which is you, selected by the State Board of Education to identify these instruments by December 31st, 2024. So that's a pretty tight timeline for us to establish criteria for selection, to put out a request for folks to apply, for you all to review and score and evaluate those applications, and for the list to be made. So we'll talk more about the timeline as we move forward, but something important to keep in mind. The statute also provides significant information about the intent of both the mandate for screening, what the screeners should look like, and how the panel should do its work. So I pulled 2 excerpts here from the statute itself that I thought were particularly important. You can read these on your own, but I think it's important that these selections echo what Dr. Darling-Hammond mentioned about the purpose of the screeners being used by educators, like other types of formative and summative assessment, to inform individualized instruction, among other things. Also, it's really important that we keep in mind that the purpose of all of this is for early identification and intervention with evidence-based instructional strategies and materials, with the end goal of improving outcomes for pupils at risk of reading difficulties. So very important pieces to keep in mind. It's also very many times throughout the statute, it's mentioned that the screening instruments must be evidence-based, culturally, linguistically, and developmentally appropriate. This is something, like I said, it's mentioned many times in the statute, and I think is very key to a successful list of screening instruments. We are reminded consistently that both language is very diverse for our students across the state, as is their cultural background, linguistic background, educational background. Every single one of our 6 million students in our education system are individuals, and the segment of those students that will be subject to these screenings are individuals as well. So that's really important to keep in mind. The assessment is for risk of reading difficulties. That's another really important piece. It is a risk screener, not a diagnostic screener. However, those reading difficulties can include possible neurological disorders as well, such as dyslexia. And reading difficulties is defined, and it is defined as a barrier that impacts a pupil's ability to learn to read or improve reading abilities. So that's pretty broad. It's a pretty broad definition. Another really important point that's brought up in the statute is that the screening instruments need to be brief tools. So as we all know, many of you are educators here. I myself was an educator for many years. Our students are subject to many different kinds of assessments. Some of them are state mandated, some of them are locally mandated. So these are really intended to be brief tools that don't create an additional burden on administrators, teachers, and students. But they should be administered by appropriately trained employees, and they should measure discrete areas to determine a pupil's risk of reading difficulties. So the statute also, the statute, in terms of looking at other state statute, our statute is pretty detailed when it comes to the screener. And our statute does put forth criteria that is required for you to consider when evaluating screening instruments. So I'm going to run through those criteria quickly here. The first piece is the screening instruments have to be based on the use of direct measurement, supplemented by other pupil data, to determine if a pupil is at risk of reading difficulty. The screening instruments must measure domains that may predict dyslexia and other reading disorders, including but not limited to measures of oral language, phonological and phonemic awareness, decoding skills, letter sound knowledge, knowledge of letter names, rapid automized naming, visual attention, reading fluency, vocabulary, and language comprehension. I apologize for reading. I don't know how to summarize all of those things, so I will just read them out to you. I'm sure you know what they mean. There must be some norming and validation of the screening instruments chosen, and it's specified that the norming and validation must be done using contemporary, multicultural, and multilingual samples of pupils, and must be included in that data, data on pupils whose home language is a language other than English, as well as native English speakers, as Dr. Darling-Hammond pointed out, and as Vice Chair Guerrero mentioned as well, or maybe I got that wrong, I think it was Member Martinez mentioned. Our student population is incredibly diverse, and so we need to make sure that the norming and validation reflects the student population of California. It also needs to integrate pupil demographic information that is relevant to the screening, including home language and English language fluency, and access to pre-kindergarten education. The screening instruments should also not just be instruments. They must also provide information to educators and to families regarding how to administer and interpret the screeners, and to also determine further individualized educational strategies. So these can't be instruments that give us information but don't tell us how to interpret that information. And as we all know that, many times the language that is used from folks who really understand how these screeners were made can seem very obvious to them, but not obvious to the people who are actually administering them. And so it's really important that these instruments provide in layman's terms, information that can be accessed by both educators and families. In addition, and again, as Dr. Darling-Hammond mentioned, all guidance needs to be informed by California's English Language Arts, English Language Development Framework, the California Dyslexia Guidelines, and must be based on effective interventions. And this multi-tiered systems of support, which is a really important support framework that has been funded and supported throughout California public schools, is also called out in the language. Oh. So some additional parameters. Those were all of the criteria that are outlined in statute, but there are some additional parameters in the statute for these screeners. There is specificity around what these screening instruments are. They are not diagnostic tools, and they should not be used to establish eligibility for special education. They are a piece of the puzzle when looking at what a student's needs are, but they are not the whole puzzle. However, they may be used by a local educational agency, like I said, as part of that map of what a student's needs are, to help determine whether further assessment is needed. And along those same lines, the results may not be used for any high-stakes purpose. This includes reclassification of English language learners or for retention purposes. Those are strictly prohibited. So as I mentioned at the top, there's significant language throughout the statute specific to screening English language learners. As Dr. Darling-Hammond mentioned, a significant portion of our population, our student population, are English language learners, especially in our younger grades, is where we tend to have our highest percentage of English language learners, which makes sense. So the panel is required to select screening instruments for both English-speaking students and non-English-speaking students in languages reflecting the primary languages of students in the state, to the extent assessments in those languages are available. This is a very key point. So when this language was being written, the authors understood that we have dozens and dozens and dozens of languages that are spoken throughout our state. These languages are not all structured in a similar manner. There's great diversity there. There is also a dearth of screening instruments in every single language that our students speak. So to the extent that we can find screening instruments that are meeting all the other criteria required of the statute, we are to provide as many of those options to our LEAs as we possibly can. However, to the extent that they are not available, the statute also identifies that possibility and provides some differential screening mechanisms for those students. Specifically, the statute guides LEAs that if a screening instrument is not available in at least one language in which a student is proficient, the risk for that student of reading difficulties is evaluated using a review of the student's other information, so their developmental history, educational history, demographic information, and literacy progress. So the panel will not be doing anything around that alternative screening mechanism, but it's important to keep in mind that that does exist when considering all of the different reading instruments and the different languages that you will be looking at them in. So as I mentioned before, but this is also repeated many times in the statute.
Yes, Jessica, I have a question.
Yes.
Should we wait to?
No, please go ahead.
About that piece.
Yeah.
And so, can you help me understand what are the parameters of this group with respect to what our role is when it comes to students who speak a different language and the assessments only being available in English or not in their language?
So the statute identifies the parameters of this panel as whatever is when you solicit publishers to solicit or to provide their screening instruments for your review, to try to choose a breadth of screening instruments that represents the greatest, the broadest language access that you can, so the greatest number of screeners in the greatest number of languages, to the extent that they also meet the other criteria that's identified in statute. Because we want to provide LEAs with as many options to reflect the needs of their students that you can. So that's what the statute essentially says. However, the statute understands that it may be that there are not screeners that meet the other criteria in every language that our students speak. And it's just important for you to know that there is an alternative mechanism for screening for those students that will be done by the local educational agency, but that is not within the purview of this panel. What's within the purview of this panel is the selection of those screeners, and the mandate there is really trying to get as much diversity of language as possible with screeners that meet the criteria.
I guess my confusion is also because there's also a requirement that we select screeners that don't just give results, but that help the assessors interpret those results. But then we're not being asked, or I guess I'm wondering how we then provide guidance that if the instrument itself is limited, how do they interpret the results? Does that mean that we can't? I'm confused about how to address that issue.
So I'm going to try to answer your question. Please let me know if I'm not answering your question. So your purview is within just the screening, the area of screening instruments. So for each of the screening instruments, let's say, for example, you select a screening instrument that provides screening in Spanish language. And your goal is to ensure that that instrument includes the interpretation for educators and families that is appropriate for families and students whose primary language is Spanish. To the extent that there is this separate process that is being done by the LEAs, that is outside of the scope of what this panel is working on, so you don't need to be providing interpretive information about that process. The interpretive information that you're required to provide is really limited to the screening instruments that you select as part of the list.
Okay. I feel like this will be an issue we'll have to talk about further. Because, amongst the group and trying to figure out how is it we select an instrument then that may have limited interpretability for the given population. And do we play no role, or do we just kind of flag for them that they should be using multiple measures? And that's where I'm confused.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an important thing for this panel to discuss as you move through the process of identifying criteria. And I would say that item 3, which you'll be looking at later today, may provide some opportunity to start having that discussion as one of the criteria that you're statutorily required to consider is what that interpretive information looks like. So, yeah. So that was a perfect segue to my next point. So as I mentioned, results from the screening are intended to be used as a larger process in the classroom by both educators and families to determine whether further evaluation is needed or identify supports for classroom instruction, enabling targeted individual intervention and allowing for further assessment after that if concerns do not resolve. So it's important to be thinking about this in the larger context of the classroom. It's a wonderful thing that we have so many educators and former teachers here, because much of this work has to be considered within the lens, through the lens of an educator. So that's very important to keep in mind. The statute also requires, this is a little bit out of the purview of this panel, but it's important to note that the statute requires that when a student is identified as being at risk, the LEA is required to provide appropriate supports and services to that student. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Again, to Member Martinez's comments, the panel is charged with providing information to LEAs about the administration of these screening instruments. So this is going to be a really important and probably potentially difficult conversation and thing for you all to work through. This means, it will be up to you to determine, for a specific instrument, is it appropriate for which grades? Is it appropriate for all K through 2? Is it appropriate for K1 or 2? And how should these things be administered? You may determine that there are certain components of an instrument that should be administered, but not others. You could determine that there are certain people that need to be part of that process. So it's really up to you to provide information to LEAs about how they should be using these instruments. So that'll be another really important component to work through. So that is a very broad overview of the statute. If you are interested, or members of the public that are listening are interested, please refer to Education Code Section 53008. It actually is very dense and very long and is much more than I could cover in this short presentation, but I highly recommend for those who are interested in following this work in grounding yourself in that statute. So next we'll discuss the work plan. Yes, I'm sorry, Member Wilson.
Do we have access to the slides? I've been taking notes, but then all of a sudden I was like, we're about to go into the work plan, which I know I'm going to want notes about.
We will ensure that you have access to the slides.
Thank you.
Or to the slides, yeah. So again, grounding ourselves in the statute, there are some statutory deadlines that inform our larger timeline. And it's interesting. The statute really only has a few timelines, but there's quite a bit that it doesn't cover that needs to be addressed before we meet those deadlines. So statute requires the panel to identify the screening instruments by December 31st, 2024. This includes completing all of the information that the panel is required to provide regarding the administration of these instruments. So that's important to keep in mind. The panel also has a governing policy that was adopted by the State Board of Education at its January board meeting. If you haven't had a chance to familiarize yourself with that, the governing policy provides more information, more detailed information about how the panel will work and do its work. So especially for members of the public who are listening in today, please refer to item 6 of the January State Board of Education meeting for more information about the governing policy. So there are many work products that the panel needs to complete. And so what I'm going to do is provide an outline of what that should look like for folks. And some of these are very specific dates. Some of them are a little bit more fluid. And so we'll be working through some of that as we go along. So the first thing that the panel is charged with is supporting a requirement in law of the SBE, the State Board, which is required to establish a review process, including how screening instruments will be evaluated against the statutory criteria for the panel to use to evaluate and approve screening instruments. So I think one thing that is a little bit of a nuance, but I think critically important for this panel to understand. So the State Board of Education is required by law to approve the criteria and the process that you will be using to evaluate screeners. That is the extent of the State Board's connection to this work. At that point, the panel has quite a bit of authority to move forward in choosing and selecting those screeners, but the state board must approve the evaluation criteria and the process that you put together. So that is going to be really important, and the first piece of work that you're going to work on is establishing that, but keeping in mind that the final decision for that does not lie with this panel, it lies with the state board. So I won't go too much into that because this afternoon the panel will review a draft review process and evaluation criteria document as a starting point for discussion. I would mention that the majority, that document is included in an addendum to item 3 for folks who are interested in looking at that at home. But I would note that the majority of that document is pulled from the statute. So it is just a starting place and just a place for us to jump off and start having a conversation. So as mentioned, I think earlier by Dr. Darling-Hammond, the State Board of Education has requested that the chair of the panel provide a presentation and informational item to the full state board at the state board's March board meeting to discuss the item that is in the addendum of item 3, as well as the feedback and discussion that you all provide and that the public provides today. So the board is interested in hearing what was the conversation that will happen today with item 3, as well as the public comment that comes back. So that will be going with your recommendation, if you all choose to vote to send the chair to speak on that to the state board at the March meeting. It is expected that the panel will finalize this document, as well as supplemental documents that will come from this document sometime this spring. And if the SBE agrees with the panel's recommendation, it is expected that the SBE will adopt the final review process and evaluation criteria at its May board meeting. The reason why this date was chosen is it gives you some time to work through the review process and evaluation criteria. However, it provides you with ample time to actually engage in the process of soliciting, reviewing, and creating the list and the administration instructions before December 31st. So as I mentioned before, it's a pretty tight timeline. We have quite a bit to do. And so we are identifying that May board meeting is really where we're going to be looking to get the board's approval on the evaluation criteria and review process. So as I mentioned before, the review process and evaluation criteria will inform how the panel solicits and scores and analyzes and reviews and evaluates the documents and screening instruments that are submitted by developers and publishers for inclusion on the list, the final list. After the instruments have been submitted, the panel will use the criteria to evaluate them and also compile, as I mentioned, information about the administration of each screening instrument. So I've created a chart here because sometimes I'm very visual, so sometimes charts are very helpful. So as you all know, you were all appointed by the State Board of Education and its January 18th board meeting. We are currently scheduled to have monthly panel meetings for those members of the public. That meeting schedule is on the website for this panel, so you can take a look and see what those dates are. It's important to note again that the process that the panel will be using is governed by our governing policy, as well as Robert's Rules of Order and the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, which Karen Gill will be speaking more to you about after this. We anticipate that at this meeting, the March meeting and the April meeting of the panel will be drafting and finalizing the evaluation criteria and the review process for the board consideration in May. It is important to remember that the May board meeting is in the first week of May, and the State Board of Education is also subject to the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, which requires publishing of the agenda and documents related to it 10 days in advance of the meeting. So we'll be shooting for the end of April for that. And that meeting is on March 6th and 7th. The May board meeting for the SBE to hear the final review process and evaluation criteria is also in early May. The panel is expected to meet that. The panel is expected to adopt the evaluation criteria by the end of April. And we anticipate that the chair and or the vice chair will be presenting that final recommendation at the May board meeting. Once that's completed, we anticipate that the panel will begin working on the development of and the release of the request for applications. That will happen sometime after May 8th and 9th. And then that the summer will be spent preparing for the review of the applications, which we anticipate will happen in the fall. And that the work to both identify the final list of screening instruments and identify the administration instructions for those, again, pursuant to law, must happen no later than December 31st. So we anticipate that the work will be completed by the end of this calendar year. However, it's important to note that the statute also identifies that the state board can periodically reconstitute the panel as needed if any updates are needed to the evaluation criteria, review process, or the list. And that can happen anytime past December 31st. However, our governing policy does identify that the term for current panel members is through December 31st, 2025. We're not currently anticipating the need to reconstitute, but it's important to note. All right, I'm going to move on to conflict of interest requirements. So to protect the process, we have very strict conflict of interest requirements. These are all spelled out in the governing policy, but it's important to note that there's very strict restriction in Education Code Section 53008 that no member of the panel may have a financial interest in any of the screening instruments that are being reviewed. And so all of this information from the governing policy is built off of that statutory requirement. A panel member may not participate in a decision if a personal bias or relationship would cause them to approach the decision in terms of how it would affect a particular person or entity rather than how it applies or promotes the public interest. So essentially, there are financial conflicts of interest and there are other non-financial conflicts of interest. And as I mentioned, financial conflicts of interest mean that you can't serve on the panel, but if you have other conflicts of interest, you will not be allowed to participate in decision-making related to the instruments for which that conflict of interest is relevant. As part of your disclosures for each quarter that you are serving on this panel, you must complete a disclosure of all your conflicts of interest. In addition, you must update and let us know if those quarterly reports, if something comes up that changes that in a timely manner. So not just waiting till the next quarter. As you all know, you must also file a Statement of Economic Interest Form 700. This is a state form, standard state form that all appointees to boards and people like me have to fill out annually. And you must also fill that out within 30 days of termination of your term. That's important to note as well. As I noted before, Education Code Section 53008B specifies that individuals may not be appointed to the panel if they have a financial interest in screening instruments under consideration. And just as a reminder, all panel members must disclose any potential financial interest as soon as they become aware of it. Finally, as I mentioned before, panel members who are determined to have financial interest in any screening instruments under consideration will be subject to removal regardless of whether or not they've completed their term. So that's the end of my presentation. I am happy to take questions now, but would note that I cannot provide you with legal advice. I can provide you with advice on what the statute says, but that's different than providing legal advice. So please keep that in mind, and I may mention that if your questions go into that territory. Chair Kim?
Thank you, Ms. Holmes. That was very helpful. Looks like that we may have some clarification questions, so you may ask any clarification questions for Ms. Holmes now. But just quickly, we'll also have an opportunity to discuss this presentation after Bagley-Keene presentation and public comments. So go ahead.
I just had a question about the statutes. I know that they were talking about being cognizant of creating screeners that keep in mind the language needs of the students, especially since they're so little. does it say anything about making sure it's not a direct translation of the English version? Because sometimes what happens with materials is that it's not created specifically for that language learner. It's created for an English speaker, and then they just directly translate it. So I was curious if I didn't see, but again, you know it better than I do at this point. Is there anything that says that we should keep in mind that the materials should be created for each language, not a direct translation of the English one? Because I know that's very difficult sometimes to measure that, especially in Spanish, because there's different syllables, there's different sounds. I know other languages have different sounds, and sometimes that's not taken into consideration. And the other thing that I didn't see there is also, does it say anything about students who have speech disabilities, like speech impairments? Because then also that should play into account if a student can't pronounce the sounds correctly. Sometimes are marked incorrectly because the person that's administering the test just goes specifically by what's written down. Sorry.
No, that's great questions. So to your first question, there's not language that's specific in the statute that refers to a translation of an English language assessment. However, there is language in the statutory criteria that requires that the tool be normed and validated to the students who would be taking that test. So essentially, if you have a tool that is in English and translated into a different language, there would have to be evidence that that tool in the other language was normed and validated to the students who would be taking that, who would be subject to that screening instrument. So I think that it's implied that the screening instruments have to be valid for the students that they are being used for. I'm sorry, can you repeat your second question?
Actually, I thought of a third one too, but my second question is, how does it say anything about students with speech impairments, with speech deficits?
That's not also referred to in the statute. I think that that's a really important thing for the panel to be considering, and certainly something that you can include in the criteria that you use to evaluate the screeners. Again, I think that kind of goes back to the norming and validating language. And the statute, it's very specific to multilingual speakers. But I think that there's enough general language in this that you could also argue that it needs to be normed and validated for any student who would be deemed it appropriate to take. I will note that there is some language in the statute that exempts students who have already been identified as having a reading disability from being assessed through this instrument. So there may be some overlap there, but there also may not be. So that's important to keep in mind when you're evaluating these screeners.
Especially students might have an English, there might be speech-only students, which just means that they're receiving services just for speech and language impairment, but not for anything else. So sometimes they are giving all the assessments, sometimes without accommodations, just because they don't have another eligibility, although they could be given. My last final question. So does it mention how we as a panel, who maybe I speak 2 languages, how would I be able to know how the other screeners that are written in other languages that I don't speak, how do we know that they're normed and validated? Or how do we look at these instruments and say, okay, I give my approval if I don't speak that language, and I won't be able to test it to see if it works?
That's a great question. We do have folks on this panel who do have experience in evaluating instruments in languages that they don't speak, and so I would defer to their better knowledge of that. I think that there's also a discussion to be had here on the part of the panel as to who will be evaluating which components or which criteria for each instrument. It may be that there are folks who don't feel comfortable evaluating the language appropriateness of each of the screening instruments, and perhaps the panel considers how it can group itself in terms of which folks are evaluating which components. But that's certainly up to the panel to decide how it wants to do that. And one of the benefits of having such a breadth of experience and knowledge across many different domains here on the panel is building or leaning on each other's knowledge for those types of discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other clarifying questions?
Are these instruments, maybe it was stated and I missed that, but are these instruments going to be developed, or are you going to different countries and looking at the instruments that they have and try to either use it or adapt it to our?
So the assumption about the process for what the panel will do is that the panel will develop the criteria that they want to measure each screening instrument against, and then we'll put out a request for anyone who would like to submit an instrument for consideration to do so. So it's possible that companies from other countries may want to submit their screening instruments for consideration by the panel. It may be that they already have those instruments developed. I don't know that much about the screening instrument development timeline. I assume that it's pretty lengthy, and so probably most of those things that the panel is going to consider will already have been created or already in existence. But it is possible that anyone could submit an instrument to the panel for consideration, and that the panel would compare the information submitted about those screeners against the criteria for the evaluation and inclusion of those instruments on the list.
Thank you. Are there any, Member Gravelin?
Just to clarify, we are able to then provide additional context that is more narrow than might be included in certain administration instructions in terms of these tools. For example, we may have a tool that says it's applicable for Vietnamese language, but we're able to provide additional context that's not already written in that tool, such as only if there is a staff member who is fluent in this language available to administer it, even if that's not included.
That is correct. It's not only allowed, it's asked of you. It's required that you do so.
Additional clarifying questions? All right, not seeing one. It's right now 10:09 a.m. Well, we'll take a 15-minute break and we'll return. Actually, it's 10:10. We'll return at 10:25. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Holmes. All right, welcome back. I see members present here. So if you're ready. Panel member Grasso, would you confirm that you're present?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Panel member Grasso, would you confirm that there's nobody in the room that you're participating from remotely?
Yes, confirmed.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to a review of the requirements of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. Ms. Gill, please begin your presentation.
Morning. Thank you, Chair Kim, Vice Chair Guerrero, and panel members. Thank you very much. My name is Kieran Gill, and I'm the Chief Counsel of the State Board of Education. To round out your orientation this morning, we're going to talk about a very important law that you're going to just start at some point calling BK or Bagley-Keene and just talking about like it's your new best friend. One of the difficulties of being a deliberative body is we have open meeting requirements. So even though today we just have, looks like one person in the room, there may be a time in which there are many people in the room, maybe a line out the door, or we have people observing and looking online. So I'm going to try to give you a very high-level overview. Each of you, as part of your appointment, have received, I think, a number of materials already that may be instructive. And the most important one is the act itself. That's available online. It's the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, and it starts on Government Code Section 11120. Of relevance here, as Ms. Holmes pointed out, Education Code Section 53008, it actually specifies that all the work of the panel and the meetings of the panel are subject to the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. There are a couple of really great guides that everybody uses and are very handy. One of them you have a copy of for sure is the California DOJ 2023 Open Meeting Act guide. That has a much richer and fuller body of discussion on some nuances or particular instances that might come up that we might not get into as part of this overview today. A good companion to that is the Department of Consumer Affairs version of that same guide. It has a couple of things that go a little bit deeper and in some other directions too that might be of interest. And of course, it's been mentioned a few times today, but the governing policy, take a good look at it. It's 7 pages, but it does specify in a few places what Bagley-Keene means and what some of the points we'll be getting into with the notice and agenda. Okay, and I assume you've read all of that and have it detailed, committed to memory, so we're just gonna be done with this in like 30 seconds, I think. Okay, so we have here from the Bagley-Keene Act itself, right from section 11120, that lists this out. You can read it for yourself, but I'll actually just use the explanation from the California DOJ guide. And what it says is that rather than striving for efficiency, the legislature has placed a higher value on having a group of individuals from a variety of experiences, just like you all, backgrounds come together to develop consensus. The Act provides the public with the ability to monitor and participate in the consensus building process. Who's covered? All state bodies. Some of those take the form of boards, commissions, committees, and essentially any multi-member body that's created by statute. In this case, you were created, this panel was created by statute. And a couple of other notes. In general, there are 2 basic types of meetings where panel business might occur and are subject and covered by the requirements of the Act. The first is a notice panel meeting, so today's meeting. Right? There was a notice, there was an agenda, there was a list of items. The second type is something that we call, that's sometimes called as a committee meeting or a rule of 3 meeting. And so what that is it consists of less than a majority or a quorum of the members of the panel. But if you engage in discussion and there are 3 or more members, panel members participating, that could be considered something that's subject to the Open Meeting Acts. We'll get into a little bit more of that and communications and all that in a later part of this, but just keep that in mind. I'm going to say this a few times because I just think it's worth emphasizing, especially in our digital age and coming out of the pandemic. We're doing lots of texting, emailing, teleconferencing, but a meeting isn't just a physical meeting. A meeting can, in fact, occur over email, over text, over any form of communication. And so just keep in mind that anytime you have 3 or more people participating in a discussion, panel members specifically participating in discussion regarding panel business, it may trigger Open Meeting Act requirements. So 3 key duties, and as the governing policy specifies, staff assists with this process. But the most important thing for the panel members to keep in mind is that there has to be notice of the meeting, and that notice will include the physical location of the meeting. There also needs to be an opportunity for the public to comment. And finally, that the meetings have to be conducted in open, except where closed sessions are expressly authorized. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on closed sessions because there are very limited circumstances in which closed sessions are authorized under the Act, and typically involves litigation that a body would be involved in, or appointment or dismissal of a public employee. That's not really going to be something that the panel will be involved in. So just bears reemphasizing that out in the open, webcasting, the whole world is watching, or sitting there and watching us. Okay. Lots of little things with notice. And if you take a look at the posted notice and agenda, it actually met or strives to meet all of these requirements. So it has to be posted at least 10 days ahead of time. For any of you that's ever served on a school board, those are under the Brown Act. It's a much shorter period of time, typically 3 days, but we have a much longer notice period. It has to be, nowadays it's over the internet. It has to be provided to anybody who requests it. As you know, we have a distribution list. It has to include the date, time, and place of the meeting, contact information, including contact information for those that might be requesting alternative formats to participate in the meeting, as well as a description of items on the agenda. So the description, it only has to be brief, and it does not need to exceed 20 words. The agenda itself has to include all items of business that would be transacted at the meeting or discussed at the meeting. And the Act actually prohibits bodies from taking up or even discussing items that were not on the agenda. The Act also specifies that you can't add an item to agenda after you've provided notice. There are some limited circumstances in which that could happen. I won't get into it here, but there are some emergency and special meeting act provisions that allow the taking up of an item with less than 10 days notice. It will trigger a couple of additional requirements if we do that, and the panel would also have to take a vote to take up an item with fewer than 10 days notice. Okay, public comment. Okay, following each item, and I think we, right after my presentation, we're going to put up the public comment slide. The public has an opportunity to comment. So any member of the public can sign up to deliver public comment in person. The most frequent form of public comment now tends to happen over the phone. And just as a note, when a member of the public is commenting on a specific item, their public comment has to be about that item. But there may be times where we have members of the public who wish to participate in the meeting and talk about something that's not on the agenda, and that's fine. And you'll notice that at the end of this agenda, we have something called the general public comment item. And if you see in there, it says specifically, this is for public comment on those issues or items that are not on this agenda. And so every now and then we may have some individuals or members of the public who wish to comment in that form. Okay, what is a meeting under the Act? Sorry, I'm looking at you, Chair Kim. I wasn't sure if you, am I, oh, okay, good. No, you're fascinated, I'm sure. This is a fascinating subject. Okay, so just what a definition of a meeting. Now, the Act itself defines what a meeting is. We've talked a little bit about this, but basically a meeting is where you have a majority of the panel members in the same place at the same time that are hearing, discussing, or deliberating on issues that are within the panel's jurisdiction. And again, that can take the form of committees or subcommittees or unofficial subcommittees with 3 or more individuals. And typically we think of these as regular meetings. So as you're familiar, there is a schedule of meetings through the end of the year for the most part. And those will all follow the typical notice requirements. And again, anytime you're voting or receiving information, including in a pre-meeting briefing, when it's a majority, that's considered a meeting that triggers all the open meeting requirements. In emails, texts, any form of communication, again, that's also when there's a majority or 3 or more, potentially triggers the Open Meeting Act requirements. So Brand new, just at the beginning of this year, we have some additional requirements on remote participation, which we're actually testing out in real time today with panel member Grasso. So at a minimum, we can have remote participation, but the most important thing is the Act really wants the bodies to strive to have at least 5 members, or sorry, the majority of the body present physically in the same space. So we have that today. We have 8 of our members, and we have 1 member participating remotely. As long as 5 are in the same place, we can have up to 4 participating remotely. And those individuals don't have to disclose the location that they're participating remotely from. But they do need to disclose if there's any individuals in the room with them that are over 18 years of age and any relationship to those individuals. And as you see, we've been confirming, I think at the beginning of this meeting, that that's not the case for the panel member who's appearing remotely. As you're probably also noticing, we have a fixed square of the remote participant is always visible as well. And in the event that someone who's appearing or participating remotely is having a technological issue or needs to turn off their camera, they have to announce the reason for doing that before they do so. Okay. This could happen, so I figure it's worth talking about. What happens if we have fewer than a majority available to participate in the same physical location? It triggers a host of requirements, right? Because really then, can the body take any kind of action or meet, really? Some additional requirements to get to 5. So let's say that we have, of our 9 members, only 3 can meet in the same physical space. What we would need then is at least 2 members who, for health reasons, can't participate, and there are additional requirements that require the board to take action around those to authorize them to both participate remotely, but also allow their 2 votes to count towards that 5 physical presence just to be able to conduct meeting business. And just as a note, this is going to come up. This is a very aggressive schedule. This is more aggressive than the state board, who meets, every other month. You guys, for now, are meeting at least once a month. Anytime you have a sense that you're not going to be able to participate in a meeting in person, but you might be able to participate remotely, please do let staff know. Let Ms. Holmes or Ms. Brindleson and Ms. Garcia know about that, so we can make the necessary arrangements and figure out if we have to make some adjustments, for example, around this particular provision. Serial meetings. Okay. So the Act prohibits the use of direct communication using intermediaries as a way to try to circumvent the Open Meeting Act requirements. A serial meeting is defined as the use of direct communication, personal intermediaries, or technological devices that are employed by a majority of members to develop a collective concurrence as to action to be taken on an item by members outside of an open meeting. So there are 2 good examples, and I'm just using random names. You've never heard any of these names before. And not singling anybody out. So one of the most common ones is a linear one, right? Think of it as a game of telephone, right? You have member 1 talks to member 2 talks to member 3 talks to member 4, right? That's considered, again, if it's discussing panel business, that's considered a serial meeting and a violation of the Bagley-Keene Act. The other very, very, very common form is the hub and the spoke. So you would have panel 1 in the middle talking to panel 2, member 2, member number 3, and member number 4. Again, about panel business, and they're all having the same conversation. One example that comes up is you could have panel member 1 say, member 2, how are you going to vote? I think you should vote this way. Member 3, how are you going to vote? I think you should vote this way. Member 4, right? So that's sort of the way to think about it, right? Is being very careful. And again, it doesn't have to be done in person, doesn't have to be done over the phone. You'd be surprised that it's very easy to do this over text, very easy to do this over email. You'll notice that when emails are sent to you don't see any other panel members on there either, because we want to avoid serial meeting. We want to avoid any ability to create a reply all function that could potentially turn it into a meeting. And I think everybody here has taken the state mandated ethics training, and they had a really good example of potential electronic device issues in serial meetings. So always good to familiarize yourself with that. And thank you also for sitting through that training. It's a long one. This is such an important topic that we're going to look at the slide 2 times. Just also keep in mind that this could also, the hub and spoke situation could take place in rotating staff briefings. That's one situation which you may have a situation where you have a serial meeting. Just again, reemphasizing phone calls, emails, text messages, any form of that. Always want to be careful to avoid serial meetings. So the best practices on this when it comes to avoiding serial meetings is that you really want to avoid discussing panel matters with other panel members outside of meetings. During breaks, meals, I expect folks will be having lunch or over email, calls, texts, chats, all that. That doesn't mean that 3 or more of you couldn't get together and talk about something else. And in fact, the act itself contemplates that members of bodies, a majority of them might be present all at the same event. Certainly you can attend those events, you can be there together, but you can't discuss panel business and keep it to safe topics, TV shows, pets, grandkids, kids, spouses, that kind of thing is all fair game. But just always be careful about that. And really, again, we're always here to support. If you ever have a question about provisions of the act, please do reach out to staff. I can't give you legal advice here today. But hopefully you understand kind of at least the cornerstones of this act and what your charge is here today. And so far, everybody's doing a great job of complying with it. Public comment slide.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gill. Now we'll open the phone line for the public comment queue. Members of the public wishing to provide comment on this item may do so by calling the telephone number and using the access code provided on the slide that is shown now. Are there any speakers signed up to provide public comment in person?
There are not.
Thank you. Is there anyone waiting to provide public comment on the phone line?
There is not.
All right, now we'll move on for panel discussion. Do members have any comments they would like to make before we move on to the next item? Hearing none, I'm not seeing any hands. This concludes this information item. All right, let's move on to item 3. Item 3 is the draft review process and evaluation criteria specified pursuant to subdivisions B1 and G of Education Code Section 53008. I thought I would briefly share the kind of a background of this document. This document includes initial ideas on the review and evaluation criteria. It was developed through discussions with the staff and their support, and it serves as a starting point for discussion and for your thoughts and input. As Ms. Holmes mentioned, our target timeline for finalizing approved screeners is December 31st of this year. However, we need approval from the State Board of Education on the evaluation criteria by the May meeting. So we've been tasked to presenting a draft for the board's feedback at the March board meeting. And the concepts in the current draft are primarily rooted in the statute that Ms. Holmes reviewed before earlier today. And additionally, we thought it was really essential and important to integrate several aspects. One is research-based and evidence-based rationale. The second one is evidence on contemporary psychometrics. The third one is evidence of precision for our diverse student population served in California, and that includes linguistic diversity and cultural diversity that has been brought up, and guidance and resources for educators and parents and guardians. Again, this document includes initial ideas, and we're here to discuss and gather your thoughts and feedback. For this item, Jennifer Joffel of West Ed, welcome, Jennifer, will be helping to facilitate our discussion. The State Board of Education is contracting with West Ed to help support the work of the panel through process facilitation and as content experts. And we are pleased to have them join us. Ms. Joffel, would you please provide us with information about the process for this item?
Yes, thank you very much. So everyone can hear me okay? Wonderful. Thanks for having me here today. So first we wanted to go over with you our approach for how we'll work through the addendum that was shared for item number 3. We broke the document down into sections that we hope will be a little bit more digestible for conversation. And so we created a slide for each of those sections. And after each slide, we'll go ahead and pause for discussion specific to that slide's content using some guiding questions, which I'll share with you in just a moment. After the panel has reviewed the entire document, there will be time for public comment. And after the public comment, we'll come back again for any final discussion from the panel. So that's the overall process. And in terms of our guiding questions, as we read through each section, we're going to ask you to consider what are the strengths of the section, what clarification is needed, and are there any gaps? Is there anything to add? And my colleagues at West Ed are busy listening into the webcast and capturing your notes, capturing your feedback so that we can turn that around as needed. So just want to be aware that while I'm here sort of acknowledging and facilitating, there are others who are capturing your thoughts. Any clarifying questions on the guidelines or the process we're going to use? Okay. So we'll go ahead and get started. You all would have received Addendum 1 as it was posted prior to the meeting. And so this is the first section, Description of Assessment Battery 1A. I am not going to painfully read it to each of you, but you should have the document there in your folder. So give you just a moment to read through the section related to 1A of Description of Assessment Battery.
I'm sorry, I just have a quick question. Where could I find that online again?
Let me double check with Ms. Holmes.
Yeah, so if you go to the agenda that is online, posted online, under item 3, it is the addendum for item 3. There is a link on the agenda that you can click on to pull that up.
Thank you. I'll take a look now.
And we'll pause a moment for you all to give it a read. So with the permission from Chair Kim, I'll ask that if you have a comment or question that you want to add, that you indicate by raising your hand, and I'll capture the order and let you know the order that we're going through as your comments come. Chair Kim, that is okay? Okay, fantastic. So are we ready to begin? Does anyone need any additional time on this one? Okay. I see panelist Wilson had a comment.
Yeah, I think it's a clarification. On item A, there are 9 domains called out, and the language says may include but not limited to, or excuse me, there's 10 domains called out. But on the first page, on B, it says including but not limited to. So I guess my question is, do all 10 of the domains have to be incorporated? The way it reads in A, it's may include, but on the front page, it's including. So I think that we need to get some clarification on that, because that 10 domains is a lot, and we need, I mean, we're going to get, I imagine, tools that have some, but not all. So I think we need to decide what does may include mean, and can we all agree on what may include means?
Thank you. Panelist Odegaard?
This seems very familiar as I've reviewed all these laws across the country. Will there be an area for clarification from our group, especially where I see redundancy? If we take the ASHA definition of language, phonological structure of a language is one of the components, yet we see oral language. Phonological is part of the expressive and receptive form of oral language. So I'm confused and need clarity about how we're not capturing phonological and phonemic awareness. Then if I look at the last one, it says language comprehension. Is that to mean oral language? Is that to mean receptive oral language? Is that to mean written receptive language? So again, clarity. And then for further clarity, as we were keeping an eye on multilingual learners, are we talking about a syllabary language where we're at the syllabic level in more of a orthographic system that would have us at that level of phonological processing? Or are we at a phonemic level in an alphabetic language that would have us think about those? So I think that thinking of language specifically and how these defined by our committee or our panel would be really helpful for us.
Thank you. Member Neeson?
Yes, so I was looking at this idea of theoretical frameworks, and I'm wondering what that term means in the use of this language. So there are many different theoretical frameworks that we could work from, but are we going to be calling them out in this guidance document? Are we going to be looking at, Aries phases, the simple view of reading, Scarborough's rope? Which of the theoretical frameworks are we going to work from? And then my second question is, in regards to English language learners, I'm also thinking about the standard English learners that we encounter across California, students whose home language is English but have markers of a different home language spoken. For example, African American or Black students who are Latino but speak English in the home. So what are the characteristics of those home languages that we're going to be considering when we're thinking about administering these types of assessments for those populations?
Thank you.
I also have a question about language proficiency and as that relates to the instrument in particular. So I feel like that's not kind of called out here, and there's an assumption that there's universality maybe here. That isn't the case.
Thank you. Other general comments or questions around clarification that panelists want to highlight? Yes, panelist Wilson?
Well, it's similar to what Member Odegaard said, but it's defining what is meant by each of these 10 domains really clearly is going to be important as we look at tools, because there's some of them that are language you already mentioned, and oral language, but also like visual attention, that it has potentially less tools that are addressing that. And so we're going to need to define what is that going to look like, what is that going to sound like in terms of an assessment tool.
Thank you. Yes, panelist Odegaard.
I saw no other hands, so. And I also think as we're clarifying the may include, thinking about a theoretical framework that's based on empirical research that is sensitive to multilinguals and takes in the language that is their home language. When it comes to what might be considered more domain general pieces of cognition, like visual attention, opposed to a language specific aspect of cognition, such as phonemic awareness, for example, or orthographic knowledge, which would be captured in the letter knowledge, because if we have a theoretical framework with a body of evidence, we might find that there's not empirical evidence to suggest that there's predictive validity for including such of a measure, and we might want to have clarifying guidance about the need for such a process to be measured.
Thank you, panelist Neeson.
And then as you're speaking, it's making me think about developmental appropriateness and how are we defining that? Will that be defined through the theoretical frameworks, or are there going to be other criteria that we'll be using when we're considering the idea of developmental appropriateness?
Thank you. Any other yes, panelist Gravlin.
And in terms of clarification of how these domains translate to when we're thinking about screening administration in different languages, how are we treating the phonological and phonemic awareness, especially in consideration with varying phonemes that other languages will have? How are we treating these letter sound knowledge, especially with non-alphabetic languages?
Being no other comments, Chair Kim, are you ready for me to move to 1B?
Sure. Just wanted to note that some of the very important comments that are coming up, I think we will find below. So I wanted to bring your attention as you look at other parts. Yes, let's move on.
So this next section is 1B. Take a moment now to read through, and then we will discuss for this section. And if the panel is ready, we could go ahead and take additional comments on this section. Either questions for clarity, strengths that folks want to point out, or gaps and areas that need to be missing. That not need to be missing, I apologize. Gaps that need to be filled, areas that are missing. Panelist Neeson.
Once again, I just want to mention the fact that when we're looking at languages other than English, we also need to consider home language that is English, but maybe not the academic language. So thinking about home language and dialects and how those have an impact on the tasks.
Thank you. Panelist Odegaard?
I'm wondering if there was a presumption of a kind of a CBM type approach to this, because we may have people with computer adaptive measures that want to be considered. Those will not always have the same subtest administered to all children, nor this idea that we would know how many items would be administered. To say we might know from a instructional purpose when I try to work with educators to help them understand how they might take one screener and they might do an item analysis to look at what they're seeing there, that they want to do something else from a diagnostic assessment standpoint to follow up for instructional planning. So I think a consideration and clarification on how we would consider computer adaptive as well as more traditional CBMs.
Thank you. And I understand panelist Grasso has a comment for us.
Yeah, more so just, I guess, just a question to add to the clarifying questions on item 2 about like the description and the directions. I guess I'm assuming that means that we're adding our own language for that? Because I would think most screeners are going to come with that, but I guess the question would be, we're expected to add our own language for item B2 for that?
Would you like to respond, Chair Kim?
Yes, please. My understanding is that we're looking for these features in our evaluation. So these are the features we'll look for when we evaluate potential screeners.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Thank you for the clarification. Other comments, questions? Okay, we'll move on to 1C. Also within description of assessment battery. Are there questions or comments from the panel on this section, description of assessment battery 1C? Yes, Panelist Martinez.
Yeah, I was not sure what standard interpretation meant. Is it then, we're assuming that this is an assessment then that was constructed for English speakers and is in English, and that's what we mean by standard?
Thank you. Yes, Panelist Odegaard.
I'm going to have to be quiet, but when I try to work with schools to use and interpret this, I often run into a need to clarify that the psychometric properties of these screeners are typically based on the composite, which is going to be all these different domains, whereas the instructional decisions and interpretation are often at the subdomain level. So I think our group might have some clarification in our guidance to make them aware of that understanding of psychometrics and really clear educator-friendly language that's not dumbing it down for them because they're educated people with college degrees, as we all have, all as educators, but also acknowledges the limitations of these and maybe considers part of our criteria what that means and how we want to do it, since they're normally composite score level for the psychometrics to make them valid.
Thank you. This time I'll remember to look behind me to see if Grasso has any comments. No. Yes, Gravelin. Member Gravelin.
I'm here in C2 for the other considerations. When we're considering the English language proficiency, I'm wondering how we are determining that proficiency level. Many of us might be aware that it is very easy for students to get marked as English language learners based on that registration paperwork. Parents check a box that they are exposed to another language, and it might be grandma, once a month that comes and visits, but then the student is marked as an English language learner, even though they have little to no actual Spanish, and they're primary, if not only English speakers. So I'm wondering how we are determining that level of language proficiency.
Thank you.
Well, to add to that, but there's always a provision that if there's reasonable doubt that you could administer the LPAC, but many times parents in the home language survey would put that the child or at home they speak English, when in reality that might not be the case. But I was wondering, and maybe this is not part of this, but is there going to be some guidance in terms of when is this appropriate to give this assessment? At what level of English proficiency, for example?
So I think it's up to the panel to determine, that conversation, right?
That's actually coming up in the next part. We request that information. Going back to the English language proficiency piece, which is very important, it is the publisher's job to describe that thoroughly. And our job is to evaluate it, whether they have provided adequate information.
Thank you. Did I see a hand over here? Panelist Wilson?
I had read the document, so I was just going to comment that there is more information about English proficiency and some of the guidelines later, and specifically in that final section and additional information. So we'll definitely get more time to discuss.
Any final thoughts on 1C before we move to the next section? Okay, we'll move forward. This section is related to psychometrics, and this includes items 2A through B on the addendum.
And I would like to make a quick note. In the addendum, the term biological sex is used, but I meant to change it to gender, and I forgot to, and I apologize. So it's meant to be gender instead of biological sex. In the PowerPoint, it's actually stated as gender, and that will be the term that will be used. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. So we'll be happy to take any comments or questions from the panel. What are the strengths of the section? What clarification is needed? Are there any gaps in the section or things to add? Yes, Member Neeson?
So it seems to me to be pretty strong in terms of what it's asking for in that reliability data. I'm also thinking one of the criteria should be how many students were assessed using those to measure the validity.
Thank you. Yes, panelist Odegaard.
This is invariably going to come up, and I'm not sure, I should have done my homework how California defines dyslexia. But if this is part of that work, then to limit this to reading difficulties in the future misses the second part of our deficits, which are spelling. So I just would put out for clarification and consideration, how are we going to address the second primary characteristic of dyslexia at the word level?
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other comments, I'll move us forward. The next section is 2C, 1 through 2, related to validity. Any questions or comments from the panel on the strengths, clarification needed, any gaps or things that are missing? Yes, panelist Neeson.
So thinking about developmental appropriateness again, I would like to see in terms of what the publishers provide is how they determined the developmental appropriateness. Because right now it just says what is that appropriateness, but what did they use to identify it?
Thank you. Any further comments from the panel? Comments or questions? Yes, panelist Martinez.
Yeah, I guess along those same lines, it'd be helpful to know the standard by which English language proficiency, the level, was defined.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no additional comments, we'll go ahead and move forward to psychometrics 2C3, criterion validity. Give you again a moment to read it. And we'll take comments from the panelists regarding strengths, clarification needed, gaps, or things to add. Panelist Neeson.
Could you define concurrent in the context of this criterion validity? I understand predictive correlations, but what does the term concurrent mean in this context?
Yes, Member Kim.
It just means prediction at the same time. So data were collected at the same time, predictive in a longitudinal sense.
Thank you for the clarification. Panelist Martinez.
Yeah, I'm wondering about if we need to add the geographic region aspect to the validity, the criterion validity aspect. I mean, if we're asking for this in the norming of the population, I think we should also ask about it as it relates to the concurrent and predictive validity.
Thank you. You can tell I like a lot of wait time. It takes me a minute to think things through, so I'm good for wait time. Panelist Wilson.
This is actually going back, but I noticed it says exceptionality status. How do you define that?
Can you tell me which slide you're referencing?
I'm sorry, it was C2. I just looked back at construct validity after Member Martinez made that comment, so I was looking back.
So it's my understanding that the language was used intentionally so that it can include different types. So that includes, for example, the ones that was mentioned earlier by Member Guerrero, such as speech language impairment and other types, so broadly.
Thank you.
Yes, Member Odegaard.
I appreciate that being brought to our attention. We might want to clarify and try to better define that, because exceptionality goes back to the writings of Samuel Kirk in this country, and we have a very specific model that word is linked to in a very specific identification process. So if we're not clear, it might be overgeneralized and interpreted by people who are trying to respond to our ask, and we don't get what we need.
Thank you. Moving us back to 2C3, just double checking if we have any further comments or questions related to 2C3. Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and move us forward. So this is the additional information section. And this one, in order to make into sections, we sort of played with the order a little bit. So we include 3A and B, and we included 3D and E, just for the sake of conversation. And then 3C, which is longer and has sub-bullets to it, we'll take that piece next. So just for this piece of the conversation, 3A through B and D through E. Yes, Vice Chair Guerrero?
Yeah, I just was wondering, this one is basically this is now involving the teachers, right? Like, for example, it says on B, user interfaces for entering and viewing scores is relevant to various users such as teachers, school, and district leaders. So maybe clarify what that, or maybe if you could clarify to me what that means exactly.
Beyond those subcategories of folks who are listed there, or?
No, like, what would they mean interfaces? Like, is that, so say it's a teacher, or the teacher would then implement the scores, or is that what that means? Like, I'm looking at a computer, putting the scores in. I was just curious was that the right line of thinking that I'm having?
Yes.
It is. Okay, so it's just, okay, got it. Thank you.
Panelist Odegaard?
We often use the word data management system and data system, which normally come with these types of screeners. We don't have that specified anywhere here, so we might want to know for the point to clarify from panelist Guerrero about that as well.
Thank you. So I think we're ready. Yes, panelist Martinez.
I have one last question. It's related to, and I don't know if it goes in this section or someplace else, but for this population, some of the tests require an adult to play a significant role in the administration of it. And I think it's important for us to understand what the competencies of that adult is and what the language and cultural match are as well, if that is taken into account.
Thank you. Panelist Wilson?
So I'm thinking about what you just said, and I'm wondering if that's in B, we would want a description by whoever's submitting a tool about what users and how they use the interface. So, because I'm trying to visualize, I guess right now I'm trying to visualize parents and guardians as users of the interface. Maybe more from a data reporting perspective, which feels like it goes in A. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but you made me think about the kind of information we'd want to see in a manual about the use of the tool.
And you're allowed to ramble, right? That's what you're here for. That's what we want you to do. Yes,
One more curiosity, since we're in California and AI and voice recognition has come a long ways, that do we want to know quite a bit about the potential use for administration of removing a person who might be literate and able to do a language and understand culture because it's being covered by an AI and voice recognition? And then what kind of psychometrics on the reliability and how that was normed would we want?
Thank you. Yes, panelist Neeson.
Maybe I'm missing this somewhere, but I'm also wondering about the guidance on the administration. Someone mentioned if an adult is going to be present, and that just got me thinking about, is the administration one-on-one? Is it a group format? Is it administered digitally or verbally? What are the administration requirements? Is that another section that we're about to review?
No, actually, it's under 1B. So a description, if you look at under 1B, for each task at each grade level, a description of the administration and scoring format and platform, that actually should include assessor qualification and all those important points you've been raising. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I thought about the missing piece there. Thanks.
Thank you. Additional comments on additional information 3A through B or D through E? Yes, panelist Neeson.
Might we consider language around integration into a district's data systems? So thinking about those safeguards and privacy pieces, how might it integrate into an LMS or reporting system at a district-wide level? So certain platforms can do that and others cannot. I think it would be important to know if those pieces are in place for the different tools we'll be reviewing.
Thank you. Panelist Martinez?
Yeah, in the, what is it, 3C, about the resources available in multiple languages. I wonder if we can also...
We haven't moved to 3C quite yet.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. It's hard the way we've taken it a little out of order. Just because it's got a lot there, so we figure there'll be a good number of comments on that one. Let's go ahead and move forward then to additional information 3C 1 through 3. Give you a moment to read through it, and then we'll start with panelist Martinez.
Okay, I have a question on...
Just 1 second, I'm sorry. Just because I said we were going to start with panelist Martinez, I want to honor that. So sorry. It probably looked like I was signaling you, and I was signaling to say, 1 sec. Sorry about that. So we'll start with panelist Martinez and then move to Vice Chair Guerrero.
I was wondering in that's section 3, the resources available to multiple languages, that multiple languages really is for the parents and guardians, and if we can also clarify that it should be parent-friendly language because this is very technical information.
Thank you. Vice Chair Guerrero, and then we have panelist Grasso.
Okay, starting with 1. It says guidance and resources for educators on how to administer screening instruments. So I just want to, because I have a lot of opinions about guidance and resources for educators, but would we then be providing that, would the School Board of Education or the state be giving administrators or schools, LEAs, how to do that? Because that's usually a big gap. We create something, it gets talked about, but it never gets filtered down correctly, nor is the time and training or money put into that, so then it just kind of peters out. So how does this work? So can you explain that to me? Like, would we be providing that guidance, or is it out of our hands and this is just mentioned here?
I think these criteria are specific to the folks who you would be evaluating think if there was additional guidance that you were discussing, I would defer that to Chair Kim. Is that? No. To Mrs. Holmes.
Hello, members. Jessica Holmes, Chief Deputy Executive Director of the State Board of Education. So the answer to your question is correct as to what Ms. Lawful indicated, that these particular criteria are specific to the screening instruments that you were going to be evaluating. To the extent that you feel that additional information about the administration of those instruments is necessary, the statute does direct you to provide that information in addition to what is provided by the publisher.
So would we be able to get data then from the educators who instrument just to see what their thoughts were on it? Because what the publishers might, or the person recommending the screener might have some data, but when we actually get data from either the unions or other educator friendly where we can get some feedback, that would be great to see, but I don't know how that would even go about, or they even collect that feedback.
So it's within your purview to request whatever information and data that you would like to request from those who are submitting their screening instruments, so that it is something that you could choose to ask for. It's just up to the panel to decide that that's a criteria that they would like to include. Yeah,
because I would like to know the satisfaction. I mean, and how they felt about it, whether it was worth it, and if information was useful. Okay. Yes, I will request. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, appreciate that. Panelist Grasso?
Yeah, I think my question kind of builds on what the last panelist was asking, like specifically around when it says professional development, and this might be more like implementation wise, but I'm just wondering if we need to clarify what that means when we say professional development and how that's done at a school and district level. Like, is that our responsibility? And I think that was kind of just asked and maybe answered. I just want to make sure I'm clear on that.
I believe that was asked and answered, but is there anything that you want to add related to the professional development?
The statutory language does direct the panel to consider what resources are provided and support for those who are administering the assessments, and also for the interpretation of that. So that is certainly, the statute identifies that you should be considering that when evaluating these screening instruments.
Thank you.
Just checking the panelist, Grasso, that was your comment, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll have more. I think we'll all probably have more questions about what that actually looks like. But I think for now, I understand that it's just a requirement that we're asking for.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Panelist Neeson.
So along those lines, I think I'd like to see in the criteria a description of what that professional development includes, whether it's PowerPoint, whether it's in-person PD that's being provided, what are the options that districts and schools have to share that information with the stakeholders. And then my other piece is around some of these other resources. So I'm going to be the cheerleader for the standard English learner in California. It would be nice to see criteria around contrastive analysis and administration rules on whether or not a student should be marked down on an item based on their articulation difference versus home language errors, right? So identifying those pieces in terms of those resources for educators. So if you have a student that is a standard English learner, what are the implications for the assessment? So are they marked incorrect, or are they marked correct because we're honoring and approaching it from an assets-based lens? So just thinking about those students.
Thank you. Yes, panelist O'Brien.
Yes, I wanted, if you could clarify the last statement about the relationship between English language proficiency and the use of the assessments in other languages.
In 3C2?
Yeah, in the very last slide at the bottom, the last sentence. Yes.
Sources available in multiple languages?
Additional guidance about English proficiency level used to determine assessment in languages other than English.
Understood. Okay. Is there any further clarification that can be added? Yes, Vice Chair Guerrero.
Thank you. Now I just want to make sure. Number 2, it said that they had a proficiency level required for valid assessments in English. I guess we can ask, what did they use? Was it the LPAC? Was it a home language survey? Or was it, what tools did they use to gather the proficiency level? Because I guess they're determining, from what I understand, they use that to determine whether to test in English or to test in another language. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. So could we request just how they established that, and then how old the LPAC information is, because sometimes we give the LPAC, but we don't get the data until a year later. So the LPAC, even though now it's online, it might be faster, but we still wait a good 6 months. So that data is really old, especially when you're using it to test somebody, because language works quickly, especially in little kids. So what they didn't know 6 months ago, they might be proficient at or not proficient. So it would be using an instrument that's going to give you more current data, which I'm hoping, but I know the LPAC is the standard, but I was just curious if we could request what else they used. Thanks.
Does that help address your question?
Not quite. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but what is the relationship between the proficiency level in English to determining, okay, we're going to use an assessment in Spanish because of the proficiency level in English? What about students who are in dual language programs and they're learning to read in that second language? The second language proficiency.
Determining which
yeah.
of the 2 languages they would. Understood. Okay, thank you.
So the statute, and I'm not going to quote it right now because I don't have it memorized, but the statute does include language that suggests that the English language test, if a student is proficient in more than one language, or if it's appropriate for the student to be tested in one of 2 languages, that the language suggests that they should be screened in English, because the language suggests, it says, if I'm recalling correctly, to the extent that a student is not proficient or is not proficient in English, or for which a screening instrument does not exist for that student's language. The language kind of suggests that would be English, but it doesn't speak specifically to that question. So I think that it would be, I think in terms of the administration information that the panel provides, in addition to the screening, the list of screening instruments, that may be something that the panel wants to consider. If a student is multilingual, which screener should be used?
Panelist Odegaard?
So I've worked with some other states on this type of stuff. We'll often have a rubric and expectations of a theoretical framework. As I've heard this conversation, I'm reminded of Noni Lasso's research, Emily Solari's research, my colleague and friend Becky Chen's research. All of them kind of triangulate on different recommendations around this topic. Having a consensus where the publisher is obligated to explain the theoretical basis and empirical basis for their rationale. Becky's research, for example, pointed in dual immersion, French speaking in Quebec. It was actually the French language of phonological processing that was a better predictor than the English language, because that was their home language that they'd heard since birth. Some would argue before birth. So from a language standpoint, they'd had their entire life to learn the phonological structure of French yet they'd only had a limited amount of time to learn the phonological structure of English. Noni Lasso's research, in contrast, showed that some actual decoding measures of English, if you wanted to predict out to 4th grade and reading English words, might be a better predictor in that case. So we have like a need for the publishers to take on the onus of understanding what motivates them in the research field, and I don't think it's our obligation to put together a synthesis piece that comes up with this, but it will probably be on us to help clarify how this is used.
Thank you.
And and just also because in special education, we actually we can assess in both languages, and sometimes we do, to establish. We don't just assess a student in English, we'll do a whole battery of tests in Spanish, and we then compare the data, and we can see where where the student falls, and then we use that to determine, eligibility. But I would be more in favor of testing in both languages and comparing. I wouldn't do one or the other, because you have to see the strengths, and you have to see and then you do a comparison, but then that requires another level of training, another level of data, and looking at the data from a different perspective, because your person out on the field, it's your teachers, and they're going to try to do this fast, and again, it's just because they have a bunch of stuff on their plate, but they're going to do it, but then someone needs to be able to take that data and interpret it for them, because that's what they need to look at. And also then when they do intervention, should the student, then the intervention coach needs to develop something using both languages. And then you get into the whole controversial thing of do we provide support in English or do we provide support in Spanish? And that's a whole other thing for us in special ed. But I lost my thoughts, but I agree with you. Sorry.
Okay. Chair Kim.
So what I'm hearing is some real guidance about the complexities of, these multilingual learners and their justification and their backgrounds, theoretical and empirical backgrounds, and so practical, like some suggestions, right? Again, that's based on evidence and research. I think that's kind of what I'm hearing.
Thank you. Other comments or questions?
I guess along those lines, I would say that I'm hoping also that we can grapple with how the instruments that we put out there and the guidance that we put out there promotes biliteracy and doesn't undermine it. And so how is it then that we help educators unpack that so that it's not a race to just English proficiency and English literacy, but a journey towards the optimal biliteracy for children then that are in that instructional program and they have a home language that they want to continue developing.
Thank you. Just pausing to see if any further thoughts are coming up. Okay. So as a reminder, pursuant to what Ms. Holmes mentioned earlier in her presentation, staff has provided a recommendation for the panelists' consideration. So that recommendation is on the screen now in front of you, which is regarding presenting the item number 3 addendum and related panel discussion and feedback and public interest holder feedback to the State Board of Ed at its March board meeting. So I just wanted to remind you that recommendation is there. And I believe unless we're ready for any further conversation right now, Chair Kim, I would hand it back to you for public comment. I do see panelist Wilson.
I actually just have a question about process. So we had this discussion, and then what will be the revision process for this item? I just don't know how the process works.
I would imagine. So we'll take all this feedback and we'll take it to the March State Board of Education meeting, and we'll take their feedback and we'll bring that to our April meeting. and then we'll make some revisions, and then we'll take that version to May State Board of Education meeting. That's what I am imagining, but if you have any other thoughts, feel free to let me know.
We anticipate that this document will go through multiple revisions, so recall too that there is also a March panel meeting. So staff will take all of the comments and feedback that were received today and make adjustments to this document and extrapolate from it, because this is not a document that on its own could be used as part of a request for submission. But we'll extrapolate on that and build on your comments to have something for the panel to consider in March. And then, as Chair Kim mentioned, you'll also have the feedback from the State Board of Education. Hopefully, you can hear me still for March, and we'll also have that to consider in April. So you'll have a couple more bites at the apple prior to the finalization of the document.
Thank you. So I want to, go ahead.
Panelist Odegaard.
I just want to clarify, there's normally a scoring rubric that is part of a package, and I don't see that, so I just have a curiosity around if there will be a scoring rubric that will be developed, or if this panel would prefer us to go without one.
There will be the rubric, and so this is just the conversation on the evaluation criteria.
I would like to remind ourselves that I would like to let you know that there will be a further discussion point for the panel members after we hear from the public. Okay. Are we ready to move on to the public comments?
We just need to get the public comment slide up for you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, panel members and Ms. Japel. We'll now open the phone line for the public comment queue. Members of the public wishing to provide comment on this item may do so by calling the telephone number and using the access code provided on the slide that is shown now. We'll first go to public comment, which will be followed by panel discussion. Are there any speakers signed up to provide public comment in person?
There is not.
Is there anyone waiting to provide public comment on the phone line?
We do have one caller. Caller with the last four numbers of your phone, 4301. You may now begin.
Please remember to
Good
turn
morning.
down the volume. Go ahead.
Did my minute start? Okay. Good morning. My name is Lindsay Tornatori, and I'm calling on behalf of California's 58 county superintendents of schools. The California county superintendents are and have been very supportive of the governor's reading difficulty screening process, and we agree that early screening will increase the likelihood of student success in literacy and beyond. Therefore, we strongly support the why behind the work ahead. A question that is a priority for us, though, is the how. We are very appreciative of the panel's very thoughtful discussions today related to the how of the implementation and evaluation of the tools. Your in-the-weeds thinking here is greatly valued because the tools will only be as effective as the user's ability to deliver and interpret the results. We value the expertise of all of you on this panel and look to each of you to ensure the tools selected will provide educators with strong guidance that will empower them to accurately identify their students' areas of need. We appreciate the opportunity to provide input, and thank you all for giving your time and expertise for this very important and righteous process that will improve outcomes for California's kids. Thank you.
Thank you. There is no further public comment.
Thank you. Panel members, is there any further discussion? All right, so I would like to ask whether we have a motion. So motion by a panel member or members. So what we are looking to, so you can look at the recommendation there. Yes. Go ahead, Neeson, Member Neeson.
I, Jessica Neeson, move to approve the recommendation to provide the panel discussion, feedback, and public interest at the State Board of Education in March. Is that correct?
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I, Tammy Wilson, will second that.
Thank you. We have a second by panel member Wilson. Before we vote, is there any further discussion?
I have a question. So I know that we're voting to say that you're going to take this back to the SBE meeting in March and then comment on it. No, we're not voting to keep it because we still have a lot of discussion. Yes? Okay. That's okay.
Thank you for clarification question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Member Martinez?
I thought in the documents that we had received that there was a comment from an organization that was sent to the whole group, and I was wondering how that gets considered.
Yeah, so the public comment that was sent to you, that was included, you were all given a copy of. In addition, that will be included as part of the comments that will be sent to the State Board, along with the public comment that was provided via the phone and the discussion comments that were provided today.
Are there any further questions or comments or discussion points? All right, Ms. Holmes, would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Member Grasso?
So I'm voting yes or no, right?
You may vote yes or no.
Yes.
Thank you. Member Gravlin?
Yes.
Vice Chair Guerrero?
Yes.
Chair Kim?
Yes.
Member O'Brien?
Yes.
Member Odegaard? Member Neeson?
Yes.
Member Martinez?
Yes.
Member Wilson?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimous.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, public and panel members. All right, I am looking at the time. It's 11:54 a.m. now.
We can go to item 4.
I'm sorry? Hey, I would love that. That's great. Let's move on to item 4, public comments, general public comment. Now, I would like to take up agenda item 4, general public comment. Public comment is invited on any matter not included on the printed agenda. Members of the public wishing to provide comment on this item may do so in person or by calling the number shown on the public comment slide. Are there any speakers signed up to provide public comment in person?
There is not.
Okay. Is there anyone waiting to provide public comment on the phone line?
There is not.
All right. I hereby adjourn our February 16, 2024 Reading Difficulties Risk Screener Selection Panel meeting at 11:55 a.m. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much for the Zoom. That was very helpful. See you all next month.